Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're doing something monumental. We are going to examine the very nature of the reality you experience.
It's a huge topic.
Yeah.
We're diving into something that sits right at the bottom of all knowledge, and frankly, it's causing a revolution right now across philosophy, cognitive science, even AI research.
We're talking about the architecture of perception.
Exactly. The thing you need to get your head around is that what we call reality isn't just a simple video feed delivered to a passive mind. It's an elaborate, multi-layered construction project.
And the big debate is where that construction happens.
Right. Is it all happening inside your skull, in your brain? Or are your body, your history, your actions? Are they actually part of the building process itself?
I love that framing. So what if this vibrant, immediate world all around you, a specific color of the sky, the feeling of gravity, the taste of your coffee, what if that isn't something your brain just passively receives?
Like a camp.
Yeah, exactly. Not like a camera recording something that's already there. What if it's something your brain and your body are actively building, moment by moment?
And building it with only partial information,
Yeah.
guided by expectation and by a whole history of action.
That tension, internal construction versus external enactment, that really is the heart of it, isn't it?
It's the core conflict driving the entire field of philosophy of mind today.
So our mission then for this deep dive is to act as, well, as philosophical detectives. We've got a dense stack of sources here, from classical metaphysics all the way to the latest papers in neurobiology.
And the goal is rigorous reconstruction. We're going to take this really fierce, complex debate, realism, consciousness, things like predictive processing and enactivism, and just organize it.
We want to break it down into clear, logical, and digestible parts. This is your definitive shortcut to understanding the metaphysics of mind.
And it's so foundational. I mean, they call metaphysics first philosophy for a reason.
Right.
It examines the basic structure of reality existence, properties, the relationship between mind and matter, and the philosophy of perception. It determines the very status of the data we get from our senses.
Which in turn determines how reliable any knowledge of the outside world can be.
Precisely.
So let's set the stage with the foundational tension that really kicked this whole thing off centuries ago. It really boils down to one huge question.
Is the world we experience the external world itself, raw and unmediated?
That's direct realism.
Or is our experience just an internal copy, a perceptual representation that's generated by our conscious mind, sitting at the very end of a long causal chain?
Which is indirect realism. And that historical divide, that's the starting point for pretty much all the modern problems we're going to get into.
So if we jump straight from there to the modern synthesis, what's the central claim running through the contemporary debate? It's dense, but it looks something like this.
Okay, lay it on us.
The traditional distinction between direct and indirect realism in perception has been fundamentally challenged by modern structuralist, disjunctivist, and enactivist philosophies,
Okay.
which variously reject the notion of internal representational content while simultaneously trying to solve the hard problem of consciousness by reducing phenomenal experience, what we call qualia to complex, self-organizing neural or bodily structures.
Wow. That is an incredibly dense, powerful statement.
It is.
But it immediately clarifies that the fight isn't just about whether there's an internal copy anymore.
No, not at all.
The fight is now about the very nature of consciousness itself. Is our subjective experience, our qualia, something irreducible and special, or is it just structure in disguise?
Precisely. And to really feel the weight of that, you have to go back and understand the historical dilemma it's trying to escape.
Yeah.
This whole thing was really formalized by thinkers like Descartes and Locke.
Right, with their radical split between the physical world, res extensa,
The splendid stuff, yeah.
and the mental thinking substance, res cogitans.
So you had these two camps. On one side, direct realism. Sometimes people call it naive realism, which is a bit unfair.
It's the common sense view, though. What you see is what's there.
It is. And its roots go way back to Aristotle. He talked about the hylomorphic form. The idea was that the very structure or essence of the object was somehow transmitted across the space to the senses.
So there was a kind of direct identity between the property you experienced, like redness, and the property of the object itself.
Exactly. Thomas Aquinas defended this view later, and it was the dominant way of thinking for centuries. And it's comforting, it implies this perfect fidelity between your mind and the world.
But that comfort got shattered by the scientific revolution.
And by philosophers like Descartes, Hume, and especially John Locke, who really laid the groundwork for indirect realism.
They pushed this idea that perception has to be mediated, that we see the world through some kind of internal framework, a representation that sits between our mind and the actual external world.
And Locke gave us the killer conceptual tool to make that shift happen. The distinction between primary and secondary qualities.
This is so important. It's a distinction that basically allowed science to move forward because it separated the objective, measurable stuff from the subjective, fuzzy stuff.
Let's pause on that because it's still so active. Primary qualities are things like mass, motion, size, shape. They're objective. They're built into the object itself.
You can't imagine an object without a shape or a size.
Right, they're explanatorily basic. But secondary qualities, that's different.
Color, smell, taste, sound.
Those are entirely dependent on the perceiver. The sensation of redness, Locke argued, it doesn't resemble anything like redness out there in the object.
Instead, it's caused by something objective.
Exactly. It's caused by the arrangement of atoms on the object's surface that reflect light waves in a specific, measurable way. The physical structure causes the subjective feeling.
And that idea just opens the floodgates for the epistemological challenge to direct realism. Because if the felt experience of red is caused by structure, then the redness isn't really in the world. It's in the mind.
And the classic thought experiment that nails this down is the bent stick argument.
Right. A straight stick, you put it in water, it looks bent.
So if you're a direct realist, what do you do with that? If your observation can be proven false just by changing the medium, the water, or by pressing on your eyeball, or by having a hallucination, then the conclusion has to be that the object you experience is always distinct from the physical object.
And this causal chain argument, it brings up this chilling idea that we're always experiencing the past.
Even if it's just milliseconds. The process, the light hitting the object, traveling to your eye, being processed by your brain, it takes time.
So if you're looking at a star 100 light years away, that star could have exploded 99 years ago. Your experience is never of the object now.
Never. It's always of an earlier stage of the object, which leads to the proximal stimulation principle. If any process, real or hallucinatory, gives you the same neural results, you'll have the same experience.
The experience is determined by what's happening at the end of the chain, in the brain.
So indirect realism seems to win the day. Perception is mediated. Epistemologically, it is as though physical objects were never given. We're locked away from direct contact.
But that victory immediately creates a new nightmare, the dualist conundrum.
The big one. If our perceptual experiences, these internal copies, are non-physical mental things, res cognans, how in the world do they cause physical things to happen?
How does the non-physical sight of a coffee cup cause my very physical arm muscles to reach out and grab it?
It's the interaction problem. It threatens the causal closure of physics, the rule that every physical event has to have a physical cause. If a thought can move a hand, the whole system of physics is incomplete.
Descartes himself admitted he was stumped by this. The ghost in the machine.
It's a philosophical mess. And that is the historical backdrop. The failure of direct realism leads to this crisis of dualism. And all modern philosophers we're about to discuss are, in one way or another, trying to find a way out of that crisis.
Okay, before we get into those escape routes, we need to get our language straight. This field uses jargon with surgical precision.
It does. Let's lay out the essential toolkit. Precise definitions are key here.
Let's do it. First, the two big ones we've covered.
Okay. 1. Direct realism. The common sense view that external objects are the literal, unmediated parts of your conscious sensory experience.
And 2, indirect realism. The view that conscious experience is mediated by internal representations or mental copies of the external world.
Right. Consciousness is at the end of a causal chain.
Okay, now the concepts that really create the modern problem.
3. Qualia. In the narrow sense, these are the non-representational phenomenological properties of experience. It's the subjective, what it is like feeling, the redness of red, the painfulness of pain.
And this is a controversial definition because it's the part that seems to defy a purely physical, structural explanation.
Which leads directly to 4, the hard problem of consciousness. This is the challenge, first really formalized by David Chalmers, of explaining how physical brain processes give rise to subjective, qualitative experience. Qualia.
The explanatory gap.
The explanatory gap, exactly. Now, the modern solutions.
The escape routes.
5. Disjunctivism. This is basically the rejection of the common kind claim. It says that a real veridical perception is a fundamentally different kind of mental state than an illusion or a hallucination.
Even if they feel identical from the inside.
Even then. And 6, inactivism. This is a powerful, biologically rooted idea. It says cognition isn't about building an internal representation of a pre-given world.
What is it then?
It's the enactment of a world and a mind, based on the organism's history of embodied sensoromotor actions. It's about doing, not representing.
And that's tied to two last key terms.
All right, 7. Autopoiesis. It means self-production. It's the idea of a self-referencing, self-maintaining system, like a living cell. And activists argue this is the very origin of cognition.
And finally,
8. Sensoromotor contingencies. This is the implicit practical knowledge of how sensory stimulation changes when you act. For some activists, this knowledge is perception, not an internal picture, but practical know-how.
okay, that vocabulary is perfect. Now we can move from the concepts to the formal arguments. Let's see the logical chains.
Let's start with the argument that really put direct realism on the back foot, the causal challenge, because all the modern theories are, in some way, trying to get around this exact logic.
Okay, argument 1, the epistemological challenge to direct realism. Let's build it. P1.
P1. Perceptual experience is the outcome of a causal process, linking the sense organs with the environment, and this process takes time.
This just grounds the whole thing in basic physics and biology. Every experience is downstream from its cause.
Right, which leads directly to P2. Since the causal process takes time, the character of the experience reflects, at most, an earlier stage of the external object.
The star that might already be gone. Our experience is always a memory, even if it's only a few milliseconds old.
Exactly. The object of my experience is never the object as it is right now.
Okay, P3.
P3. The character of experience can be altered by changes in internal conditions, like your sense organs or your neurophysiology, without any change in the external physical object itself.
That's the bent stick, the eyeball pressure, the hallucination. The internal state can be detached from the external reality.
Which gives us P4. Any process yielding the same sensory or neural results will yield the same perceptual experience regardless of what, if anything, initiated it.
That's the proximal stimulation principle made explicit. What happens at the end of the chain inside you dictates the experience.
Leading to the conclusion.
Therefore, the direct object of experience is an entity produced at the end of the causal process, distinct from the physical object that initiated it. Perception is mediated and indirect.
And boom! Indirect realism seems logically sound, but it lands us right in the middle of the hard problem.
So now we need the second great argument, the modern structuralist counterattack that tries to dissolve that hard problem.
This is a powerful reductionist move. It takes aim at the central premise of the hard problem, that consciousness has properties, qualia, that exist over and above its physical structure.
All right, let's build this one. Argument 2, the structural qualia solution.
P1. The hard problem arises from the tension between three ideas. A. All natural objects are fully analyzable in structural terms. B. Consciousness has properties, qualia, over and above its structure. And C. Consciousness can be explained by natural sciences.
And you can't have all three. If you accept A and B, that reality is structural but consciousness isn't, then you have to reject C. Science can't explain it.
Which is P2. To accept A and B means rejecting C, which leads to ontological dualism. Property dualism, like Chalmers proposes.
And the structuralist refuses to go there.
Right, because dualism is philosophically problematic. It brings back the interaction problem. So P3, a non-dual solution requires rejecting premise B.
And this is the big move. They have to argue that qualia, the subjective feeling, must be fully analyzable in structural terms. The feeling of red has to be somehow just physical information.
Which leads to the mechanism, P4. Qualia are, in fact, complex compositional structures, specifically patterns of neural activity that are reducible to networks of unconscious associations.
They have internal structures that fully define their qualitative nature.
Yes. And now for the knockout punch, P5. The apparent monadic, simple, qualitative nature of qualia is merely a consequence of the complex neural pattern misperceiving its own highly complex structural properties as simple and qualitative.
Wow. That's a nuclear option, isn't it? It's saying the core mystery of consciousness, its immediate subjective feeling, is just a mistake, the system misunderstanding itself.
Which gives us the conclusion. C. Therefore, consciousness as a whole is a complex neural pattern, fully analyzable in structural terms, and the hard problem is solved, or rather, dissolved, without endorsing dualism.
It's clean, it's comprehensive, and it is profoundly counterintuitive.
It is, but if it holds, the difference between us and a very sophisticated AI with the same structure isn't a metaphysical one, it's just an engineering problem.
Okay, let's pause right there on P5, the structural qualia thesis. This is arguably the most difficult conceptual leap in this whole deep dive.
It's the crux of the whole physicalist argument against dualism.
You have to accept that your most intimate, basic experience, the simple feeling of redness, is a fundamental illusion of simplicity.
The source text we're looking at summarizes it in this one really challenging paragraph.
Right, it says, thus consciousness as a whole can be seen as a complex neural pattern that misperceives some of its own highly complex structural properties as monadic and qualitative. Such neural pattern is analyzable in fully structural terms, and thereby the hard problem is solved.
Let's break that down. This is the physicalist's masterstroke against the dualist who says, but the redness just feels simple.
Right, the dualist argument is that this simple, unified feeling, the quale, which feels monadic or indivisible, can't possibly be a physical thing.
And the structuralist says that feeling of simplicity, that's the error.
Okay.
They argue that the experience of, say, the color yellow isn't just one thing. It's a massive, dynamic, layered structural organization in your brain. A vast network of neural firing, hysterical associations, memory traces. It's structurally unbelievably complex.
But when I look at a lemon, I just experience simple, unified yellow.
Because your conscious system, your high-level awareness, it lacks the ability to monitor that staggering underlying complexity in real time. The brain is optimized for quick functional output, not for detailed self-inspection.
No, it experiences its own complexity as simplicity.
It essentially compresses this enormous, tangled structural pattern into a single, unified, irreducible feeling quality. The complexity is physical and real. The simplicity is a subjective illusion generated by the system's own limitations.
Okay, we absolutely need the analogy for this. Let's make this concrete. We were talking about a high-resolution digital photograph printed on paper.
Perfect. So when you just look at that photo from a normal distance, what you see, your phenomenal experience, is, let's say, a perfectly smooth, vivid red circle.
That's the monadic, qualitative experience of the quail. It feels simple, pure, indivisible.
Now, you take that exact same piece of paper and you put it under a powerful microscope.
And the simple red circle completely vanishes.
It's gone. What you see instead are millions of tiny, separate geometric dots, cyan, magenta, yellow, and black ink, arranged in an incredibly precise and purely structural pattern.
The image is just the pattern of the dots. There's no extra redness property hiding in the paper beyond the structure of the ink.
Exactly. Our everyday vision, which lacks that microscopic view, integrates that complex structural pattern and, well, it misperceives it as the simple quality of red. The qualitative experience is the structure, just viewed from a perspective that's built for speed, not for granular detail.
And if you accept that analogy, then the structuralist claims they've dissolved the hard problem. They can say that all those classic philosophical thought experiments that try to save dualism just become incoherent.
Let's take the philosophical zombie, a being that is physically identical to me, down to the last neuron, but has no subjective experience, no qualia.
If structure is the quality, then the zombie becomes logically impossible.
It's like saying, here's a print with the exact perfect arrangement of CMYK dots, but somehow it just doesn't have the property of being an image. The contradiction, the structure is the image. If the zombie is structurally identical, it must be conscious, because consciousness is that structure.
What about the inverted qualia problem, where my experience of red is like your experience of green, but we're functionally identical?
That also becomes inconsistent. It would be like saying a sound has the exact overtone structure of a guitar, but it somehow sounds like a trumpet. If the physical structure is identical, the ink dots, the sound waves, the neural pattern, the qualitative experience must also be identical. A phenomenal difference has to trace back to a structural difference.
This all seems maybe a little too neat. What's the common pushback here? Why isn't everyone a structuralist?
The main charge is that this approach doesn't really explain consciousness, it just explains it away.
Okay.
Critics argue that, yeah, you've explained the functional role of the neural pattern, but you haven't explained why that specific structure feels like anything at all. Why should a complex network of neurons result in that specific feeling of red rather than just being a dark, meaningless computation?
They're saying the structuralist just pushes the problem back a level.
Correct. Why does that structure have that subjective what-its-likeness? The structuralist replies that the what-its-likeness is the structure, experienced from the inside. But that tension, the functional explanation versus the phenomenal feeling, that's still the deepest divide in the philosophy of mind.
Okay, so the structural qualia solution is one massive response to the dualist nightmare. It basically says, let's keep the idea of internal representation, but let's make that representation entirely physical and structural.
Right.
But there's this other major movement that takes a completely different path. It rejects the in the head paradigm entirely.
These are the anti-representationalists, disjunctivism and inactivism. They want to restore a kind of direct contact with the world, not through naive realism, but through action.
They're challenging the core premise that perception must be mediated by a mental copy.
Exactly. If indirect realism relies on the idea that all experiences, real, illusory, hallucinatory, are of the same fundamental kind, these theories just flat out reject that common kind claim.
Let's start with disjunctivism. Why is it so critical for them to argue that a real perception and an identical feeling hallucination are not the same kind of mental state?
It's the linchpin of their whole externalist view. The causal argument we broke down earlier, it stands or falls on that common kind claim. If the internal brain state is identical in both cases, then the experience must be determined internally.
Which makes it indirect.
Right. But the disjunctivist wants to say that in a successful perception, the external object is literally a constituent part of your mental state.
Okay, so then how do they define the character of a hallucination without making it an internal mental state?
This is the tricky part. They define it negatively. Someone like MGF Martin suggests that a perfect hallucination has no more to its phenomenal character than the negative epistemic property of being introspectively indiscriminable from a veridical perception.
That sounds incredibly abstract. Let's try a concrete scenario.
Okay, you're sitting in a chair looking at a real red apple on a table. That's mental state A. Now, a neuroscientist zaps your brain and makes you hallucinate an identical red apple. That's mental state B. The indirect realist says A and B are the same mental kind. They share the same internal content.
But the disjunctivist says no.
The disjunctivist says mental state A is constituted by the actual physical apple. Mental state B is only defined by the fact that it's like A, but it's missing the actual object. The world is part of your mental state when you really perceive.
Which means they have to embrace cognitive externalism, the idea that what's in your head isn't the only thing that determines your mental state.
Absolutely. It's like Putnam's twin Earth thought experiment. Oscar on Earth thinks about H2O. His identical twin on another planet, Toscar, thinks about a different chemical, XYZ, that looks and acts just like water.
Their brains are identical.
Identical. But their thoughts have different content because the external world plays a constitutive role in what their thoughts are about. The disjunctivist just applies that same logic directly to perception.
So now we get to the movement that really radicalizes this whole anti-representational idea. Inactivism.
Right. Varela, Thompson, and Roche introduced this idea that cognition isn't about internally representing a pre-given world. Instead, it's the enactment or the bringing forth of a world and a mind.
And this is driven by the organism's history of embodied action.
Exactly. Organisms aren't passive receivers. They are active shapers of their environment. This whole idea is deeply, deeply biological.
It seems to move the discussion out of just the brain and into the entire living system.
It does. They rely heavily on the concept of autopoiesis, self-production. A living system, like a cell, is constantly maintaining and reproducing its own organization.
And the philosophical takeaway from that is huge.
It is. They argue that this capacity for self-maintenance is the origin of sense-making. If a system is autopoietic, it's driven to exist. And in doing so, it creates a domain of significance. Cognition is present in all living systems, even a simple bacterium.
It's not just adapting to a neutral world.
No, the organism brings forth a world of relevance. Sucrose is only food for a bacterium because of its metabolic needs. The world becomes meaningful, full of threats, resources, affordances, through the organism's activity.
So let's apply this to human perception with sensormotor knowledge and activism. This is Alvin Noe's work.
Right? Noe says perception isn't something that happens in us, it's something we actively do. Perceptual awareness is an achievement of sensoromotor understanding.
It's a skilled activity.
Dynamic, skilled activity. You are aware of the world only because you implicitly understand how your movements would change your sensory input.
Give me an example of how this knowledge of sensormotor contingencies would define an experience.
Okay, think about the difference between looking at a real 3D cube and a flat picture of a cube.
Okay.
When I look at the real cube and I move my head slightly, my retinal image changes in a specific, predictable way based on the laws of perspective. I have this implicit, practical knowledge of how my movement contingently changes my sensation.
And with the photograph,
I can move my head, but the image doesn't change according to those 3D laws. I recognize it as flat because I know I can't walk around it to see the other side. So the experience of seeing depth is the awareness of my ability to exercise those specific sensorimotor skills.
so the feeling of an object's softness isn't a static internal label. It's the practical knowledge that if I press it, it will yield in a certain way.
Exactly. Noe's equation is how things nearly appear to be, plus sensoromotor knowledge gives you how things are.
And then there's radical inactivism, which pushes it even further.
Hutto and Maitian, yeah. They claim basic cognition is entirely contentless and non-representational. They're against the very idea that the brain contains semantic content, meaningful concepts like chair or justice.
This is our hard problem of content.
Exactly. They challenge mainstream cognitive science and say, look, the brain just tracks correlations. How do you get from non-semantic correlations to actual semantic meaning? If cognition is just embodied action, maybe you don't need internal representations at all.
Which sets the stage perfectly for the last, and maybe most influential modern framework, predictive processing, or PP.
This is the one that tries to be a bridge, integrating the success of neural modeling with the active, embodied nature of the inactivists.
And PP, usually associated with Carl Friston, it just flips the whole script.
Yeah.
The brain isn't a passive input processor.
It's an active prediction engine. It's constantly running a sophisticated simulation of the world.
So the brain first builds a model of prediction, and then it just checks its sensory input to see if it got it right.
And the difference between the prediction and the input, that's the prediction error. That's the only newsworthy information the system really cares about.
This whole thing is governed by the free energy principle, right?
All right. The FEP suggests that all living systems, to maintain their existence, remember autopoiesis, must minimize their surprise. And the best way for a brain to do that is to get really, really good at predicting its sensory input.
And it's not just one big prediction, it's a whole hierarchy.
A massive, nested system. Higher-level models, like your belief that a coffee mug is solid, generate predictions for lower-level sensory input, like the specific light waves hitting your retina.
And if there's a mismatch, an error.
The error signal gets passed up the hierarchy, forcing the higher levels to either update the model, which is perception, or, and this is crucial, to initiate active inference.
Action. This is the link to inactivism.
Absolutely. The brain can minimize prediction error in two ways. Change the model or change the world to make the model right.
So if I predict my hand will feel the weight of the mug, actually gripping the mug is an action that makes my prediction come true, minimizing the error.
And just like that, perception and action become two sides of the same coin. Both are in the business of minimizing prediction error.
This explains why the world feels so stable and immediate. We're not perceiving reality raw. We're perceiving our brain's best, continuously updated, self-fulfilling guess about reality.
And it explains so many strange phenomena. Take phantom limb pain. The brain's model of the body still predicts input from the missing limb. When it gets nothing back, that massive prediction error registers as pain, which is the ultimate "your model is failing" signal.
Or the placebo effect.
Same mechanism. If you generate a strong enough prediction that a sugar pill will ease your pain, that top-down prediction can literally override the bottom-up sensory input from the injury. The expectation shapes the experience.
But the inactivists would still criticize this as being too in the head, right? It's still all about internal models.
It is, which is why there's a compromise.
Yep.
Embodied, Embedded Predictive Processing, or EEPP.
Okay.
EEPP accepts the core mechanics of PP, but it insists that the whole organism, the body, and the environment plays a constitutive role in cognition, not just an enabling one. The body is part of the computation.
So the body isn't just a tool the brain uses, it's doing some of the cognitive work itself. How?
EEPP points to three key roles. One, the body regulates cognitive activity through things like homeostasis and interoception. It acts as a distributor. It carries some of the cognitive load. By moving your eyes or walking closer to something, you are literally performing an action in the world that minimizes prediction error, which saves the brain from having to do a ton of internal computation.
It's outsourcing the work.
And three, it constrains the information. Your specific body, with its specific senses and abilities, fundamentally shapes and limits the kind of world you can model in the first place.
So EEPP is the grand synthesis. The brain is a prediction machine, but its predictions and errors are inseparable from the body it lives in and the world it acts upon.
It's an attempt to have the best of both worlds,
Hmm.
the structure of the physicalists and the action and embodiment of the inactivists.
Okay, let's try to unpack all of this and bring it back to you, the learner. We started with the classical failure of naive realism, which forced us into indirect realism and the nightmare of dualism.
And the whole project of contemporary philosophy of mind has really been this structural turn, the attempt to escape that dualist nightmare while holding on to physicalism.
And we saw two main routes. Route one was structural qualia realism, dissolving subjectivity by arguing that qualia, the feeling, is just a complex neural structure that the brain misperceives as simple.
Basically, solving the hard problem by declaring the hard part an illusion of introspection.
And route two was the move away from internal representation altogether, disjunctivism and inactivism.
Right. They tried to restore direct contact with the world, not by denying illusion, but by insisting that real perception is a unique, world-involving mental state that you can only achieve through embodied action.
So why does this matter to you? Why should you care about this structural turn? Because it completely eradicates the idea that you are a passive observer of reality.
Whether it's through predictive processing or embodied action, you are actively creating the reality you experience. Your knowledge isn't a mirror of the world.
It's a history of dynamic, embodied coupling with it. Your perception is an achievement, not a passive recording.
And on that note, we'll leave you with one last provocative thought, which draws on the deep philosophical roots of inactivism.
Right. And activism is inspired by Mahayana Buddhist philosophy, specifically this concept of groundlessness, the idea that nothing has a fixed, independent being.
The implication is that cognition, as the inaction of a world, means that cognition has no ground or foundation beyond its own history. Our best scientific models are just functionally optimized systems.
They're optimized for survival and prediction error minimization.
Which raises this critical, deep question about the limits of what we can know.
Hmm.
If ultimate reality is, as some argue, ungraspable and beyond conception, and our best models, like EEPP, are just highly optimized systems for predicting and surviving within a world of our own making.
Then to what extent can the philosophy of perception, or any science, really claim to be illuminating the ultimate objective nature of reality?
And to what extent is it merely describing the complex, highly optimized structure of our own human conceptual and physiological tools?
That is the ultimate test of this structural turn.
Right.
Does it reveal the world as it truly is? Or does it just reveal the world as we must see it to survive? That's something to ponder the next time you look at a red apple and you think about what's real.